Sukihantu and good evening to ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Dhamma Dana series brought to you by Buddhist Mahavihara Malaysia. Today's sessions is also live on TBC and Facebook. Do subscribe to our Facebook for more information. The topic for tonight is the Buddha's teaching on emotions by Bhante Suddhaso. Just a bit background about Bhante. Bhante Suddhaso is a bhikkhu trained in the Thai forest traditions of Ajahn Chah. He was ordained and trained by Ajahn Pasono in the US. He had also lived for extended periods of time at Bhavana Society and many other Buddhist monasteries of both Theravada and Mahayana lineages. His teachings are focused on the early Buddhist texts and their practical application, both in meditation practice and in daily life. In 2016, Ayya Soma and Bhante Sudaso co-founded Buddhist Insights, an organization with the missions of increasing access to monastic Buddhism in Western countries. And 2019, they opened Empty Cloud Monastery, a gender-inclusive monastery right outside New York City, where Bhante Sudaso usually resides. Without further ado, let's invite Bhante to join us in our live sessions. Good morning, Bhante. Welcome to our Dhamma Dana series today. And over to you now.
Okay, well, good evening, everyone, and good morning to those who are here in the United States. So we can begin with paying homage to the Buddha. So please join your hands in Anjali and bring up a mind of reverence for the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So welcome to everyone who's participating, especially any members of the Mahasangha, so bhikkhus or bhikkhunis who are joining in today, as well as to all of our lay friends who are here to learn more about the Dhamma. And special gratitude to all the people who run the Dhamma Dana program. It's a really wonderful service to be offering to the world. So much appreciation for inviting me to come and be part of this program for a session. So the topic for today is the Buddhist teachings on emotions. And this is an important topic for many reasons. Well, one reason is because we all have emotions. So it's actually very important to understand what our own experience is and how to relate it to the Dhamma. And it's also very important because there's a lot of misunderstandings about how to relate to emotions in Buddhist practice. So actually, relatively often, I'll hear people say things like, aren't we trying to get rid of all of our emotions? Isn't the point of Buddhist practice to eliminate our emotions? And the answer is no, that's actually not what we're trying to do. That's not what it means to be a Buddhist practitioner. And it's not what it means to be awakened. So an awakened being doesn't necessarily remove all of their emotions, but rather their relationship to emotion has changed. So from an unhealthy way of relating to emotions to a healthy way of relating to emotions. So first off, it's important also to have some understanding of what we mean when we talk about emotion. So emotion fits most easily into the category of mental objects or mental phenomena. So emotions are sankharas, So a sankhara is a conditional phenomenon, compounded phenomenon. It's something which is a temporary construct within the world of samsara. It's a temporary construct. And a sankhara can be physical, or it can be non-physical, or it can be some combination of the two. So emotions are predominantly they're mental phenomena, mental objects, mental processes, mental activities, mental sensations. But they can also have a physical correlate. So when there's some emotional experience happening in the mind, there's often some corresponding sensations in the body as well. So although emotions are predominantly a mental experience, it can also affect our physical experience. It can affect how we experience our bodies as well. So first off, it's good to, again, remember that the basic beginning point for any kind of investigation and analysis of our experiences with sati, with mindfulness, with clear awareness. And it's also important to remember that this is not the beginning point of Buddhist practice. So sati is actually relatively advanced in Buddhist practice. Buddhist practice always begins with generosity, so dana, and morality, sila. So we start by practicing generosity, and in the course of giving things to others, sharing with others, caring about others in this very real, tangible way, we're cultivating wholesome karma, and we're also generating positive emotions. So emotions of kindness, of compassion, of caring, and a sense of happiness and joy connected with wholesome activities. So when you give a gift to somebody else and you feel happiness and joy arising from your own act of generosity, that's happiness connected with the wholesome. So this is an emotion which is supportive to one's Buddhist practice and which ultimately leads towards both a positive rebirth or can also be a supportive condition for attaining awakening. And similarly with practicing morality. So taking on the moral practices, the 5 precepts of a lay person, or if one is taking on a more renunciant path, it might be 8 precepts, 10 precepts, 227 precepts, 311 precepts. So taking on moral practices, which the foundation is the precepts, and the precepts are all about not causing any harm to ourselves or to others. And also, we make an active effort to bring benefit to ourselves and others. So the first precept is not killing. So that's the basic thing, is don't kill sentient beings. But we also actively try to support and nourish and care for other sentient beings. And that helps to, again, produce positive emotions. So wholesome emotions, emotions which are productive of good karma and supportive of awakening. Similarly with not stealing, that's the basic precept, is not to steal. But the more advanced practice is to practice generosity, giving and caring and sharing what we have with others. So this also, again, as I mentioned earlier, is a way of producing positive emotion, producing emotions which are good karma and support our practice of awakening. Similarly with the third precept, so avoiding sexual misconduct. So sexual misconduct is infidelity, adultery, sexual assault, and so on. So we try to avoid that. And instead we cultivate trustworthiness and genuine kindness in our relationships. So again, producing positive emotions. So loving kindness and compassion. And trustworthiness, respect for each other. And the fourth precept, not telling lies. Again, that's the basic practice, is just to not tell lies. The more advanced practice is to say what is true, what is beneficial, and to say it gently, at the right time and with a mind of metta, a mind of loving kindness. So here also we're cultivating wholesome emotions, positive emotions. And finally, the fifth precept of not consuming alcohol or any other intoxicant that weakens our mindfulness and self-restraint. Here also, that's the basic practice, but the more advanced practice is to cultivate continuous mindfulness, self-awareness, and self-restraint. So a constant sense of heedfulness and alertness, vigilance, which is also supportive of developing wholesome emotions. So this is actually where Buddhist practice starts, is with practicing generosity and morality. And practicing generosity and morality already supports the cultivation of awareness of body-mind, cultivates the development of a knowing of what's going on within our own body-mind. And it's also already starting to train us in avoiding harmful mental patterns, because all of our activities come from mental patterns. So in order to kill something, you first need to have the mental impulse of wanting to kill. In order to steal something, there first has to be the mental impulse of wanting to steal, and so on. So it always starts in the mind. So in order to practice generosity and morality, one needs to have enough awareness of the mind that one recognizes the unwholesome impulses and can stop them before they turn into actions. And also enough self-control in order to intentionally generate positive emotions and manifest those through actions. So the practices of generosity and morality help to prepare the mind for deeper meditation and self-investigation, because it already cultivates a certain degree of mental and emotional self-awareness and self-control, which is, again, a very important part of our Buddhist practice. So then once the mind is well prepared through practicing generosity and morality, then we can start talking about, again, more advanced practices. Satipatthana, the establishment of mindfulness, which is one of the major frameworks that we use when we talk about self-investigation in Buddhism. So Satipatthana is divided into 4 categories, 4 domains of mindfulness. The first one is body, so our physical experience. The second one is sensation, in particular the sensations of pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. And the third one is of the mind, so mindfulness of mind, observing the mind. So chitta-anupassana means observing the mind, and this is the third satipatthana. And this is where the observation of emotion starts to become very clearly mentioned as part of Buddhist practice. So in the description of chitta-anupassana, for example, the Buddha says one knows a lustful mind as a lustful mind, or one knows a mind without lust as a mind without lust. One knows a hate-filled mind as a hate-filled mind, and one knows a hate-free mind as a hate-free mind, and so on. So this is the point of satipatthana, of establishing mindfulness, where one has a clear knowing of one's own experience, of mental states, of mental phenomena, of mental patterns and qualities. So, and then for completeness, the fourth one is Dhammanupassana, so observing Dhammas, observing phenomena or mental objects in particular. But in terms of emotion, we're most particularly focused on this third satipatthana. So this third satipatthana is chitta-anupassana. So observing the mind, observing the states of mind, the qualities and characteristics of mind. So in terms of emotion, the first thing is, again, to be aware. So when an emotion is happening in the mind, then to pay attention to your mind. Pay attention to what that emotion feels like, recognizing it for what it is. And so this doesn't mean that we immediately try to crush it. It doesn't mean that we ignore it or suppress it. But the first thing is to be clearly, fully aware. And for many people, this is actually very difficult. So many people have a very strong habit of ignoring their emotions. And the problem is that when you ignore the emotions, they still affect you. And they still affect how you speak, they affect how you act, they affect how you feel. But because you're ignoring them, you don't understand why you're acting in that way. You don't understand why you're speaking in that way or feeling that way. So the effect is still present, and it can be very strong, in fact. But because one is ignoring or suppressing one's emotional states, there's not an awareness of what to do about it. There's not an awareness of why we're having a unwholesome experience, unwholesome behavior, or unpleasant behavior. And therefore, there's not much that we can do. Whereas if one pays close attention to one's states of mind at all times, so always being clearly aware of one's emotional states, then one can recognize the emotional states as they appear, as they shift and change and eventually disappear. And therefore, one can be alert to how those emotional states are affecting the way we speak and the way we act, so that we can always keep ourselves practicing in line with the Dhamma. So if what's arising is an unwholesome emotion, then we can keep it from shifting our speech and actions towards the unwholesome. And if what's arising is a wholesome emotion, then we can use that to support our development of wholesome speech and wholesome activities. But it always starts with a clear self-awareness, a clear knowing of one's emotional states. And it's also important to recognize that emotional states predominantly are the result of past karma, so past actions, past activities that we've engaged in. So that builds up habits and patterns of emotional reactivity in the mind. So this means that at the moment when an emotional state occurs, the moment when it arises, it's a involuntary arising. It's an involuntary appearance. It's something which we're not doing deliberately, but rather it's something which appears based upon past causes and conditions. So as it arises, we can recognize, first off, this is the product of past causes and conditions. It's not necessarily something I'm doing right now. So for example, you might just be sitting on the train one day and spontaneously this feeling of hatred or anger appears in the mind. And you're like, oh, I'm a horrible person. I'm such a bad person. I'm an angry person. I'm a hateful person. I'm horrible. But actually, that's not correct. You're not a bad person. You're not an angry person. You're not a hateful person. However, because of past causes and conditions, that emotional state is currently appearing in the mind. So it's happening involuntarily as a product of the past. But once it appears, then we have a choice. Do we choose to participate in that emotional state to make it stronger? Then now we're making deliberate karma in the present moment. Or do we choose to express that emotion? Maybe through speaking in a hostile or unkind way to others. Well, again, that's karma. That's making an action in the present moment. It's producing karma in the present moment. Or do we choose to ignore that emotion and pretend it isn't there? Well, again, that's making an action in the present moment, an action which leads to delusion, which is not something we want to cultivate. So the proper way to behave then is to clearly identify the emotional experience as it's arising. First off, recognize that in the moment of its arising, it is subconscious, it's unintentional, it's involuntary. Therefore, it's not something we're actively doing right now. It's like seeing something with your eyes. Well, the object you're looking at is not you. It's something outside of yourself. It's something you're not creating. So in the same way, when the emotion first arises, we're seeing it, but it isn't who we are. It's not something that we're doing. So we recognize it as anatta, as impersonal, not me, not mine. And in fact, it can be very helpful when an emotion appears in the mind. It can be very helpful to gently remind yourself, this is not me, this is not mine. This is not who I am. So that we were able to maintain a little bit of distance from it. Usually when an emotion arises, we immediately think, this is mine, this is me, this is who I am. But that's incorrect. The correct perspective is to see any emotional experience as, this is not mine, this is not me, this is not who I am. And our next activity then is to identify the emotion as either wholesome or unwholesome. So is it an emotion that supports the practice of wholesome mind states, or is it something which obstructs unwholesome mind states? So if it's wholesome, for example, loving kindness is a wholesome emotion, metta, wholesome emotion, then it's actually worth supporting and nourishing that, making it stronger, deliberately making it stronger. If it's an unwholesome emotion, again, such as anger or hatred, then we want to be very careful that we don't let it affect anything that we do or anything that we say. And we also want to be very careful not to nourish and feed that emotion in any way. And in fact, we want to make an effort to cultivate positive emotion to replace that, to replace the unwholesome emotion. And also as emotions arise, again, often they seem to be completely out of control. And the reason that they seem to be out of control is because they are, again, at the moment of their arising, they are involuntary and therefore, in fact, out of control. They're not something that we can directly control because we're not producing them in the first place. So when emotions arise, another thing that's very important is to recognize that they are constantly changing. So our emotional state is in a constant state of flux and change. It never remains exactly the same, even for a short period of time. It's always shifting and changing. And in fact, this is something which our language is simply incapable of expressing. So emotional experience has an incredible variety and range. And so we lump hundreds of distinct experiences. We lump them all under a single word, like the word love. We lump hundreds of emotional experiences under the single word love. Or sadness. Again, there's hundreds of distinct shades and varieties and flavors of sadness, but we just call all of them sadness. Well, it's not particularly accurate. When you pay close attention to your emotional states, then you'll recognize that they're always in shift and flux. And sometimes they're this way, and sometimes they're this way, and sometimes it's like this, and sometimes it's like that. So paying very close attention and recognizing that they're constantly changing. And recognizing also that when we identify as any emotion, when we get wrapped up and involved and consumed with any emotion, then it becomes a cause of suffering. So when we participate in and identify as an emotional experience, when we think, this is me, this is who I am, this is what I am, I have to hold on to this and keep this because it's me. When we relate in that way, then we experience dukkha, experience suffering. So then again, relating to emotional states with the clear wisdom of knowing, first off, that this is the product of past causes and conditions. So at its first appearance, it's not necessarily something we're actively doing. Rather, it's something which is appearing on its own because of past causes and conditions. Just like a weed sprouting in your garden, or a wildflower sprouting in your garden. It just comes up of its own accord when the conditions are right. And next, we identify it as anicca, dukkha, anatta. So it's constantly changing, shifting and altering. Even while it's present, it's constantly changing. And of course, it's sometimes an emotion is there and sometimes it isn't there. So it's anicca. And while it is there, you can observe this constant fluctuation, the constant flux of the emotion. So it's anicca, it's impermanent, it's constantly changing. It's temporary, it's unstable. And it's dukkha. So what makes it dukkha is that if we identify as the emotion, if we try to hold on to the emotion, if we get wrapped up in the emotion and we think the emotion is who we are, then that grasping causes us suffering. It causes us an experience of mental turmoil. So if you think I am my emotions, well, the problem is that emotions are unstable and disturbing and can throw you completely off balance. So it's very important that we don't identify as the emotions, but rather that we see them for what they are. So temporary, unsatisfying, and impersonal. So, and again, recognizing emotions as impersonal. This is not me. I am not this. This is not who I am. So this is not something that defines me. It's not something that controls me. It's just a temporary experience that's passing through the mind. But it's necessary to be clearly and fully aware of that experience so that it doesn't overwhelm us. It doesn't sweep us away. And this then can be a powerful basis for the development of insight. So through acknowledging our mental and emotional experience, so through acknowledging the mind states that we go through over the course of a day, we're cultivating an intense, clear awareness. And we're also becoming intensely clearly aware of one of the strongest bastions of self-identity. So our self-identity tends to be very deeply rooted in our subconscious mental activities and patterns, which includes a large part of our emotion. So through cultivating a clear awareness of our emotional states and recognizing them as anicca, dukkha, anatta, we're able to cut off a large portion of our self-identity, a large portion of our self-clinging, which keeps us caught in the cycle of birth and death, the cycle of suffering. And it's also important to be aware that the stabilization of mind, so the stabilization of mind through samadhi, so through cultivating concentration and unification of mind, is both supported by a wholesome relationship to one's emotions and also supports a wholesome relationship to one's emotions. So when the mind is very unstable and unsteady, so constantly being knocked around by different emotional states, then that makes it very difficult to concentrate, very difficult to steady and stabilize the mind. But through cultivating emotional self-awareness and recognizing these emotions as anicca, dukkha, anatta, then one can discover a haven of safety and stability within the mind. So like being in the eye of the storm. It's like all the storm is blowing around you, but right in the center, it's calm and peaceful. So in the same way, when you clearly see emotions as anicca, dukkha, anatta, and choose to not get involved in them, then that's like sitting right at that still point in the middle of the storm. So you can feel the emotions swirling around you like a storm, but the mind remains steady and calm and peaceful. So you don't need to destroy all emotion in order to enter deep samadhi. You simply need to learn how to be unaffected by the emotional states that are flowing through the mind. And learning how to be unaffected by them necessitates that one be clearly, fully, intensely aware of those emotional states. And again, you don't need to get rid of them in order to have a peaceful mind. You simply need to be unaffected by them. Again, like being in the eye of the storm, and the storm swirls around you but doesn't affect you. In the same way, you can watch the emotions swirling through the mind but not be affected by them. And then the mind can become unified in samadhi, become very stable and peaceful and still. And similarly, as one cultivates concentration, cultivates samadhi, cultivates this steady, unified, focused state of mind, then it becomes easier to recognize emotional states and not be swept away by them. And also one is cultivating a sense of stability, of steadiness, of immobility in the mind, so that then the swirling winds of emotion don't knock us off balance. So one of the images the Buddha uses in the suttas is like a tree. A young tree can be knocked over by the wind, but a stone mountain cannot. So when the mind is in samadhi, then it becomes like a stone mountain. So even the strongest wind will not knock over the mountain, won't be bent over or tossed around by the wind. So in the same way, when the mind is in concentration, it can't be knocked around or thrown off balance by even the strongest emotional winds. These are just a few thoughts which come immediately to mind about the cultivation of mindfulness of emotion. So cultivating a wholesome relationship with emotion. So one thing which I think is very useful in any discourse about Dhamma is to have discussion. So to have questions and responses as a way of furthering things. So when one listens to a discourse on Dhamma, it's very easy to get all kinds of incorrect opinions about the Dhamma. It's very easy to get to misunderstand what's being said, or it's very easy to interpret things in a way which is not quite in line with the Dhamma. And that can all come out very clearly through the course of discussion. So actually the Buddha said that one of the karmic conditions for the arising of wisdom is that one asks questions to experienced contemplatives. So through asking questions to monks, then that creates the karmic condition for the arising of wisdom. And even if one thinks one understands a topic, it's still important to ask questions for further information, further clarification, and also to give oneself the opportunity to explore deeper into a subject. Actually, I've often found that one of the best ways to get a deeper understanding of a topic is to ask a question that you think you already know the answer to. And maybe you know the answer and maybe you don't. But through asking a question that you think you know the answer to, you might get answers which surprise you or which are off the line of what you were expecting. So I see there's a question already. So this question says, may I know what is the best way to control anger when someone said something untrue to me? So this is quite challenging. So the first thing, once again, is to be aware of your own emotional experience. So somebody says something to you which you believe is untrue. Well, first off, pay attention to your mind. So noticing what's coming up in the mind. So if a feeling of anger is arising, well, the first thing is to be aware that a feeling of anger is arising. So knowing that this is your experience. And it's important then to be very careful that you don't do anything which will strengthen that feeling of anger. And also that you don't do any activities which are based on that anger. So don't speak based on that anger. Don't do any physical activity based upon that anger. And sometimes that means that you don't reply right away. Sometimes it means that you take some time to stabilize your mind, to steady your mind before you respond to a situation. And that's okay. One thing which is actually really helpful in these situations is to come back to the feeling of your feet against the ground. So always grounding your attention through the sensation of your feet, keeping the mind steady and stable by focusing with mindfulness of the body. And controlling the anger, well, recognize the anger as again, conditional. So it arises based upon conditions. It's temporary, it's unstable, and it's impersonal, so it's not who you are. But also recognizing that if you act based upon that anger, then you might say and do things which are unwholesome. You might say and do things which generate bad karma and possibly also damage your relationships with other people. So producing harm in your life, both in the short term and in the long term. So that's something to watch out for. So And as for controlling anger when it arises, well, actually, the truth is that once the anger arises, it's already too late to control it. The best way to control anger is to practice a lot of loving kindness meditation so that your mind's habit is towards loving kindness rather than towards anger. Then when you're in situations which would normally trigger an anger response, it won't have that effect on you. So we're more interested in vaccinating the mind rather than trying to cure it when it's already sick. So practicing loving kindness all the time is a way of vaccinating the mind against the arising of anger in the first place. If you constantly saturate the mind with metta, with loving kindness and compassion, then anger will come up much less frequently, and it will be much less strong when it does come up. Another thing which helps a lot is, again, to do a lot of samadhi practice. So when you cultivate samadhi, you're training your mind to be peaceful and calm and still while remaining alert and aware. So this also means that anger will come up less frequently and will be much less strong when it does appear. In the moment when the anger is present, again, your number one priority is don't strengthen the anger. And your next priority is don't do anything which is based on anger. Don't speak based on anger. Don't act based on anger. Because that will just lead to you making bad karma, making bad choices, which make things worse both for yourself and for others. The main way to eliminate a negative emotion is through non-participation. So relax, steady your mind, and watch the anger, and the anger will fade away on its own. As long as you don't feed it, it will fade away on its own. So you can relax your face, bring up a little smile, just let the anger fade away, let it dissipate. It can also help to remind yourself that the world is full of unawakened people who make bad choices. And in fact, you are often one of those unawakened people who makes bad choices. So we can have compassion and forgiveness for the person in front of us who's making a bad choice, who's making an unwholesome choice. And we can wish well for them. May this person come to understand the Dhamma so that they can control themselves and not say wrong things, not do wrong things. And you can also then start to produce a mind of metta if you can. So wishing, may everyone be happy, may everyone be happy. Starting to stabilize the mind again through replacing an unwholesome emotion with a positive emotion, a wholesome emotion. Those are a few things that you can do. And I see another question. Kelvin asks, is it better to suppress negative emotions according to the Dhamma or find ways to overcome it? If so, what are some of the methods as prescribed in the Dhamma? So again, I don't particularly like the word suppress, because when we talk about suppressing emotion, it's not actually fixing the problem. It's more ignoring the problem. So the first thing is, once again, to be aware. So don't try to ignore the emotional state. Be aware of it, but don't act it out. If an unwholesome emotion is present, don't act it out through speech and body. And as I was mentioning before, so cultivate insight, so recognizing it as anicca, dukkha, anatta, especially anatta is really helpful in dealing with emotions. So recognizing that the emotions are impersonal. They're not me, they're not mine, they're not who I am. So recognizing it as anicca, dukkha, anatta, cultivating concentration, so practicing mindfulness of the body to steady and stabilize the mind. And again, this is not suppressing the emotion. You're actually still maintaining awareness of the emotion, but you're directing your attention towards steadying awareness on mindfulness of the body. So then through non-participation, the emotion will fade away on its own. And even if the emotion doesn't fade away immediately or quickly, because we're not participating in it, then we're not generating any bad karma. So an emotion appearing in the mind does not mean that you are actually creating bad karma in that moment. Just like if you hear somebody talking, that doesn't mean that you are talking. It just means that you hear something. In the same way, if you notice an emotion appearing in the mind, that doesn't mean that you are doing it. It just means that an emotion has appeared in the mind. But you have a choice whether to strengthen that emotion or not. Do you feed it or do you let it starve? So if you let the emotion starve, then it will fade away on its own. And even while it's present, it's not something that you're doing. Therefore, you are not generating any bad karma. But you need to have a very strong, sharp, and clear self-awareness to be clear that you aren't strengthening the emotion. Usually when an emotional state persists in the mind for a long period of time, it's because we're feeding it. We're actively doing something to feed and nourish and sustain that emotion. So you need to be very careful that you aren't doing that. And Rachel says, does it mean that unexpected emotions are predominantly past karmic actions? How do we handle at the present moment without generating new karmic actions? Yes. So when an emotion first appears, it's the product of past karma. It's not necessarily something that you're doing at that moment. It might be, which again is why you need to pay clear attention to your own mind, because we do have the ability to intentionally generate an emotion in the present moment. We can do that. But usually an emotion appears because of past karma, past actions that we've done, which have trained the mind to react and behave in particular ways. So we're actually not in control of our mind most of the time. Usually our mind is more like a dog. It just does whatever we've trained it to do. So when an emotion first appears, it's usually the result of however we've trained our mind to be in the past. So then in the present moment, you want to be aware of it, but be very careful. Be very careful that you don't feed that emotion. If it's unwholesome, be careful not to feed it. If it's wholesome, then actually feeding a wholesome emotion is a good choice. But if an unwholesome emotion is present, then you want to be careful not to feed it. But you want to maintain full awareness of it. When you lose your full and clear awareness of an emotion, then it will start to subtly dominate your mind. It will tend to bleed out through everything that you say. It will bleed out through your facial expressions. It will bleed out through your tone of voice. It will affect how you move your body. And that can be visible to other people. And also it's something which is subtly nourishing that emotion. So you want to be careful to maintain clear awareness of the emotional states that are present. And again, if they're unwholesome, be very careful that you don't let it influence anything that you do with your body or your speech. Instead you want to generate new karma, which is wholesome. So deliberately doing wholesome things with body, speech, and mind. So building new habits of mind. So when an unwholesome emotion appears, it's the result of having made not so good choices in the past, generated bad mental habits in the past. And so now we need to change that. So it's a constant process of training and developing the mind, of training the mind to always be in wholesome states and reducing the occurrence of unwholesome states. And Janaki says, the best way according to Dhamma to handle emotions, whether good or bad, is to become aware of it, but without personalizing the emotion, correct? Neither responding nor reacting, so that no karma is generated. Yeah. So again, when we talk about emotions, I think good or bad is a little too narrow of a way of talking about it. I prefer to talk about it as wholesome and unwholesome, and actually neutral. A lot of emotion is simply neutral. So aware of it without personalizing it, that's very important. Not responding or reacting, also important. And then to deliberately produce karma, which is wholesome. So remembering that in every moment we have the ability to decide what we're going to do with our mind. We have the ability to choose how we're going to shape and direct and train our own mind. So you always want to shape the mind to point towards awakening and not towards anything else. You always want to direct the mind along the course of the wholesome and not along the course of the unwholesome. By the way, I should also say a little bit more about some emotions which are, again, they're not particularly wholesome or unwholesome necessarily, but which can be the product of past actions. So for example, sadness or grief, it's usually the product of past clinging, past attachment. So when we want things to be a particular way and they go otherwise, then it's normal for sadness or depression or irritation or grief to appear in the mind. So at the time of that arising, you can recognize, oh, this is natural. Of course, this is what's going to happen. For example, if you're very attached to a person and then that person suddenly passes away, well, it's normal that grief and sadness are going to appear in the mind. So you recognize, oh, this is perfectly natural. This is perfectly normal. This is completely expectable. It's not surprising at all that this sadness and grief is appearing in the mind. And it's also impersonal. It's not me. It's just a natural product of cause and effect. And there's no need for me to actively participate in and strengthen this grief, this sadness. Rather, I can watch it as it passes through the mind and recognize it as a natural product of cause and effect. And Kelvin says, so it's much like the Four Noble Truths of emotion exists. It has a cause. Bad emotions will cease and good will increase when you perform positive actions on it. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily try to map it directly on the Four Noble Truths in that way. So the Four Noble Truths are about dukkha. And emotions are not inherently dukkha in the sense of being inherently painful. But emotions are dukkha in the sense of being inherently unsatisfying. When we cling to them, then they become suffering. So remember that the Buddha said panchupadana kanda dukkha. He did not say panchakanda dukkha. And he further clarifies this in, I believe it's the Mahavedala Sutta, but I'd have to look it up. Pretty sure it's the Mahavedala Sutta, where the Buddha, he says, somebody asked the Buddha, are the five khandhas dukkha? And the Buddha replies, no, it's the upadana, it's the grasping and clinging, which is the dukkha. The five khandhas are just the five khandhas, that's all. But when we have grasping, clinging, desire, attachment in relationship to the five khandhas, then that is the dukkha. So emotion is part of this. So again, emotion is part of the five khandhas. So it most easily fits under the fourth khandha of sankhara. So emotion is not itself painful. It's not itself suffering. But when there is grasping and clinging and delusion in relationship to emotion, then that is suffering. That is dukkha. So this actually touches on the two slightly different uses of the word dukkha in the Pali language. Actually, there's more than two uses, but we'll focus on two for now. So one is dukkha in the sense of pain, suffering, misery in general. And the other is dukkha in the sense of that which is a cause of suffering, that which is capable of producing suffering. So, for example, when the Buddha says "Sabbe Sankhara dukkha," this doesn't mean that all things are inherently painful, but rather it means that all things are capable of producing pain when they're grasped at in the wrong way by the mind. So that's a different way of understanding what the word dukkha is meaning in this case. So similarly, emotions are not dukkha in the sense of being inherently painful, but they are dukkha in the sense that they are capable of producing suffering when we have grasping and misunderstanding of them. So if there's any other questions, then I can take some other questions. Or if that's all that we have, then we can go ahead and start moving towards wrapping up. So again, just to briefly summarize that in Buddhist practice, we're not trying to eliminate emotions. So we're not trying to become lifeless robots. That's not the purpose of Buddhist practice. But rather, we want to start with a clear awareness of our emotional states, whatever they might happen to be, an understanding of the causal basis for emotions, understanding that emotions come and go based upon cause and effect, an understanding of the three characteristics, that emotions are all impermanent, impersonal, unsatisfying, not our true self, not who we are. An understanding that we always have a choice, whether or not to act based upon emotions that appear or not. So through cultivating the Noble Eightfold Path, we're not necessarily destroying our emotional conditions, but rather we're learning how to identify them and relate to them wisely. Learning how to relate to them in a way that reduces our suffering and reduces the harm that we cause to others. And it leads to an increase in wisdom and mental stability. So I think that's all I have to say for this session. So again, thank you to everyone who manages this program, who sets it up and keeps it running, and also to all of you who have joined in today to have a discussion about the Dhamma. It's always wonderful to spend time discussing the Dhamma. And I think we can go ahead and conclude at this time with 3 sadhus, and then I'll pass it back over to the moderator of the program. So we can all say 3 sadhus together. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll pass it back to the moderator.
Thank you so much, Bhante, for sharing us the Dhamma for tonight and also answering all questions from our audience. We would like to invite Bhante to conduct Anumodana.
So at this time, I'll chant just a short blessing for all of you. So as I do this chant, you can focus on the goodness in your own heart. So the sense of happiness and peace that comes through practicing the Dhamma, through cultivating an understanding and experience of the Dhamma. And you can also dedicate these blessings to any loved ones in your life, whether living or departed, and to all sentient beings. Sabba roga vinimuto, sabba santa bhavajito, sabba viramati kanto nibuto chatuvam bhava. Sabitiyo vivajantu, sabba rogo vinasatu. Mati bhavadvandarayo sukhiri kayuko bhava. Abhivadana sili sanichang punta pachayino. Chandaro dhamma vantanti ayuvanno sukhang. Balang bhavatu sabba mangalang rakhantu sabba devata. Sabba buddhanubhavena sada soti bhavantu te. Bhavatu sabba mangalang rakantu sabba devata. Sabba dhammanubhavena sada soti bhavantu te. Bhavatu sabba mangalang rakantu sabba devata. Sabba sanghano bhavena sada soti bhavantu te. May the blessings of the Triple Gem always be with you.
Thank you so much, Bhante, again. On behalf of the monk and management of Mahavihara, we would like to thank Bhante for his time and sharing his Dhamma knowledge with us. We would also like to express our gratitude to all our sponsors for their kind donations and all our audience for joining us tonight. Good night, everyone, and have a pleasant evening. Suki Hantu.